This video is over an hour long, so turn the lights off, relax, and get ready for a long night of chills and tension. Before we start, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into the stories. For the last decade, it's been our annual tradition to hoodwink one another through increasingly elaborate tricks, always good-natured, and always confined to that April morning. It was a spot of fun. It was only ever meant to be a spot of fun. I tend to be the one who is fooled the most, given that I rarely pay attention to the date. I need phone reminders to remember birthdays and anniversaries, even my own. Perhaps I should have set a reminder for April 1st long ago, but I was never quite competitive enough to bother, and I no longer want to think of that accursed day ever again. Unlike me, Monica has always been a little better at keeping track of the days, so I've long had to work hard to dupe her. Typically, the smaller the prank, the less suspicious she becomes. If my mind ticks over quickly enough to conjure a trick on the spot, I'll add something to whatever prank my wife has just pulled. That catches her off guard. Once, for instance, Monica pranked me at my workplace, so I convinced her that she'd parked on the double yellows outside, and would have to move her car before the traffic warden arrived. It gave me a chuckle to watch her rush outside. Still, that was a minor prank, like most of the stunts I've pulled over the years, but I'd always wanted to do something bigger. And this year, the stars aligned. On March 31st, my silly, unobservant, caveman brain did something out of the ordinary. It clocked the date. I actually managed to prepare for April Fool's Day. Now it can be a little tricky to plan anything whenever April 1st falls on a weekday, but things lined up nicely this year, as I work from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I came up with something silly but harmless. When I woke on the big day, around 8 in the morning, I was relieved to find that I hadn't opened my eyes to a bedroom cluttered with near-bursting balloons, like 2 years earlier. Of course, I had no doubt that Monica was planning something far greater, but I remained determined not to be fooled. For once, I was ready for my wife's tomfoolery. More importantly, I was ready for a little of my own. "Good morning, Brad," she said as I entered the kitchen hurriedly. I mustered up my sternest and most somber expression, then shook my head firmly. "Not really," Monica smiled. "Oh, I see. You remembered that its sucky mittens is stuck on the roof," I interrupted, preventing her from revealing the date, so as not to arouse doubt, so as not to, most importantly, fudge my one shot at nailing the perfect prank. Mittens, our white-pawed tabby cat, is the true love of Monica's life, and though our oft-fearless feline loves to explore, she has a tendency to be afflicted by panic attacks at the most inopportune moments. For greater context, our house sits in the angular nook of a cul-de-sac. It bears an L-shaped layout, with the upper bedroom overlooking the garage. Whenever the window is left ajar, Mittens jumps out onto the garage's roof tiles, and then she'll jump another story down to the driveway below. But quite often, the she becomes quite suddenly shell-shocked and freezes in the gutter, uncertain about making the jump. This was the perfect setup for my prank. Build off an everyday occurrence. That's the way to trick a trickster. Of course, as I said, I wanted to go bigger. A tame prank such as this would have been sufficient to fool Monica, but it hardly would have been satisfying, not nearly as satisfying as whatever she had planned. "Give her a few minutes, and she'll jump down," Monica said, before wrinkling her brow. "Why do you look so worried? She spends half her life on that roof." I gulped convincingly, then delivered the blow. "Mittens is stuck on the top roof." Monica's eyes grew large. "A storm felled one of our garden's tall oaks last month, and it tumbled directly onto the second-floor roof, creating a staggering large hole in it. We hired help and managed to clear the tree and debris, but we still haven't raised the funds for a roofing job yet. The temporary fix was to nail a couple large tarpaulins over the hole, somewhat sheltering the attic from the elements. Professionals told us that the entire roof would need to be redone, as the damage done to it had brought its entire structural integrity into question. Therefore, the thought of Mittens being up there, rather than on the lower garage roof, was alarming. Monica gasped and shot up from her seat. "Why is she even on the top roof?" She's never gone up there. Did she climb up the pipe? I shrugged my arms. I don't know. I woke up and heard meowing from the bedroom window. When I poked my head out, I could see her a few feet above me, shivering as she peered over the edge of the top gutter. I tried to encourage her to jump into my arms, but Monica had already rushed past me at this point, and I was tailing her up the stairs with a broad grin on my face. Once we'd scurried into the bedroom and my wife had shoved her head out of the bedroom window, I failed to hold my breath any longer. I let out an almighty snort. Mittens! Monica screeched into the sky, leaning backwards out of the window to look up at the roof's edge. I don't see her up there, Brad. Why are you laughing about this? She trailed off, then pulled her head back into the room, wearing a smirk and flushed cheeks. Oh, you little shit. April Fool. I brayed with laughter. Mittens is sleeping in the bathroom. You plunker. I was worried she'd give the game away. That was a better trick than usual from you, I have to admit, Monica replied, eyeing me with great respect, hands on her hips. You know Monica, yelled a croaky, but tremendous voice from our driveway. It was Mr. Worth from next door. Monica's cheeks flushed more brightly, and I started cackling louder, relishing in the greater success of my harmless joke. Now she'd embarrassed herself in front of the neighbor. Not just any neighbor. Mr. Worth, the old, beady-eyed, gray-haired Scrooge, who everybody on the street feared. Not a pleasant man in the slightest. Monica, are you okay? Mr. Worth continued from outside. I was just watering the peonies, and I heard, hello, are you still there? Why were you screaming? She groaned. Oh, I really don't want to have to explain everything to that psychopath. The worst part is that he'll tell me off for this, not you. Then my wife's eyes widened, and she rushed back to the window. Mr. Worth, oh thank heavens for you. Bradley was messing around, and he threw our cat up onto the roof. What? I hissed from behind her, tugging at the back of her t-shirt. Truce, Monica continued, and poor little Mittens won't come down. She's so scared up there. She's bloody idiots. Mr. Worth roared in interruption. The pair of you, bloody idiots. You were screaming over a cat. Give me strength. I thought one of you had actually found yourselves in trouble. But you, hey, where have you gone? Stop disappearing, young lady. I'm talking to you. Monica had pulled her head back into the bedroom, and she was giggling uncontrollably. Why did you tell him that? I moaned. What do you mean? Monica answered innocently, fluttering her eyelashes. I was just passing along the story that you told me, Brad. With a slight embellishment, I groaned, coming to a realization. Let me guess, I'm going to have to be the one to tell the miserable old man that it was all a prank. My wife nodded cheekily. Seems only fair. Besides, I've already received a telling off from him. So you're definitely due one for getting us into this mess. I rolled my eyes and shook my head with a smile. You pulled a Brad, turned the prank around on me. Right, I'll go and put my shoes on. Don't much fancy taunting him from the window. I slumped downstairs, searched for a good pair of trainers that wouldn't earn a cursory look, or a few cutting words of disapproval from our horrid next-door neighbor. And as I slipped into a respectable pair, there came a heavy thud from outside. I hurried over to the front door, flung it open, and laid my disbelieving eyes upon the 70-something-year-old Mr. Worth ascending a tall metal ladder up to the roof. Stop, cried out Monica disbelievingly. From the bedroom window, we were only but one more word out of you, and I'll call the police. Mr. Worth hissed in my wife's face as he climbed past our bedroom window at a surprisingly nimble pace. Filthy creatures, cats, but they still deserve better owners than the likes of you two. Mr. Worth, I yelled, trying to finish what Monica had been saying. It was a joke, and April, where is the damn beast? The old man interrupted again, as he poked his head over the edge of the roof, scanning its tiles. Our neighbor either willingly ignored us, or, perhaps more likely, had not registered a word we said. He was often too stubborn to admit that he was hard of hearing. Monica winced as the old man dragged his frail body over the edge of the roof. Bradley, I'd already started to climb up the ladder behind the crawling man, realizing that, for whatever reason, He wasn't listening to us. I could hear his knobbly knees and bony hands shuffling across the tiles, taking him dangerously near to the tarpaulins, to the hole which spanned a sizable stretch of the roof. I could see little from my perspective, but I certainly heard that sound, that thunderous crash, followed by a few more thunderous crashes, and 2 intermingled screams. "Monica," I bellowed, rapidly slipping down the ladder, and half twisting my ankle at the bottom. I limped back into the house, climbed the stairs, then stopped at the entrance to the bedroom. The bed and the carpet were both buried beneath a 3 feet tall heap, comprising of shingles, grooved chipboard panels, and plasterboard. The room's ceiling had gone, as had the attic and roof above it. A hole revealed the sky above, letting blinding sunlight inside. "Monica," I whimpered, eyeing the unthinkably dense mound of rubble. "Here," whispered a timid voice from behind me. With my heart thumping, fearful adrenaline replaced with overbearing joy, I spun at immense speed, and I released a grateful wail when I faced my pale-faced, anxious wife on the upstairs landing. I dashed forwards and embraced her, so immensely glad that she had backed away from the bedroom before Mr. Worth came tumbling through the roof and ceiling. "He's in there, isn't he?" I asked, gulping as I turned back to face the demolished bedroom. "Somewhere in that rubble. He's..." "Stop," Monica blubbered, eyes welling as she stared into the room. "Sorry," I apologized. Then I tore my phone out of my pocket. "You're right, Mon. It's not safe in here. We need to go downstairs. I'll call an ambulance. And, Jesus, poor Mr. Worth." It was only once I'd absent-mindedly walked downstairs, whilst explaining what had happened to the emergency operator, that I realized Monica wasn't following. I looked back upstairs in confusion, only half hearing the voice in the phone telling me that paramedics and firefighters were coming. "Mon," I called out, "come on, are you two still inside the house?" The eavesdropping operator asked. "It's an unsafe structure. Please wait on the driveway for emergency responders." "Monica," I cried a second time as I placed a hand on the staircase's banister. "It's not safe up there. Come downstairs." But my wife's eyes, wet and unblinking, remained fixed on the bedroom door ahead. She hadn't budged an inch. "Stop," she repeated, not turning to look at me as I made my way upstairs. "We need to get away from the bedroom, Mon," I said, making my way onto the landing with an outstretched hand. "You need to stop looking at it." "But it won't stop looking at me," she whispered. Those words set my hairs set on end, as did something else, a cold gaze that fell upon me, burning into my flesh. I followed Monica's eyeline to the bedroom, to the bulge of ceramic and plaster that had filled up that space. The wreckage had formed a ramshackle den of sorts, and in that hidey-hole's shadowed recess, I saw it, a single bloodshot eye, watching us from the dark. I wanted to open my mouth to cry, but that terror remained very much on the inside, for the icy wintry gaze had frozen me quite stiffly to the spot, which of course, only terrified me more greatly. Then the debris shifted, and out emerged the shape that sported the eye, the shape of Mr. Worth. Only once that man had freed himself of his rubble shackles, it became clear that he was no longer our next-door neighbor, or at least, no longer human, given the many long, hefty, blood-stained wood fragments puncturing through his body. From front to back and back to front, one 2-feet-long piece of wood traveled through the gray matter in his skull, exiting through a bloody eye socket at the front of his face. It was horrifyingly impossible. There was no earthly way in which that man could have been standing on 2 feet, no possible way in which he could be observing the two of us, with his one remaining eye. The only living thing remaining of Mr. Worth was his rage. Rage he exuded from a white complexion. The man lurched forwards, and the outline of his body warbled slightly, making it clear that this spectacle wasn't the superhuman feat of some brain-damaged man. Near death, a man using the last of his brain's functionality to rise to his feet. No, this was some paranormal anomaly, sitting in disarray with its surroundings. The color and shape of his body didn't seem rigid, seemed neither entirely opaque, nor grounded in reality. This nightmare walking towards Monica and me was not Mr. Worth. It was his undead spirit, and it wanted us. There was no time to process the unholiness and inexplicableness of such things as spirits existing. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing my wife's hand. As I turned to flee, one of the creature's chipped discolored nails tore into my forearm, leaving a jagged wound that is still festering as I type. I yelped and pulled Monica away, hoping to save her from that fiend. As we tore down the stairs, I felt the warmth of her hand in mine this time. I'd finally pried her away from the landing, away from the terrifying pursuer. Its spectral energy clung to our world, blaming us for its demise, and I didn't plan on letting it rob us of life too, of bringing us into its world. There came a rush of freedom, both physical and supernatural, as I rushed through the front door, and the air hit my face. The unliving thing was bound to its resting place. It could not follow beyond that threshold. I ran into the street, hearing the approaching sirens of the ambulance and fire engine, and then I kept running as people asked that same question, over and over, a question that took time to sink into my mind. Long after the emergency responders had poured out of their vehicles and into my house, "Where's Monica?" I realized that I hadn't felt the warmth of my wife's hand in mine since leaving the house. And hours later, once the adrenaline had fled my body to make room for the paramedics' terrible words, I finally processed the truth. The firefighters had found 2 bodies in the rubble. I was at the bar with my buddy Matt when he convinced me to download the app. We're both broke with a ton of student loans, so aside from the occasional $2 pint night at our local dive, drinking anything other than store-bought booze was a rarity for us. But Matt had said a celebration was in order, and that he was paying, which was enough to get me off of my couch for happy hour. He milked the situation, refusing to tell me exactly what we were celebrating until we were a few beers in. Sick of waiting for an explanation, I guessed it was a new job, and Matt gave a mischievous grin. "It's way better than that," he said. "It's an app called Task." I rolled my eyes. We'd both tried every gig app out there. When I'd get sick of switching between Uber and Lyft, and watching sorority girls puke out of the backseat of my car, I'd drive for DoorDash for a few weeks until the smell of fast food started to make me nauseous. After that, I'd hustle for gigs on Fiverr, or pick up odd jobs on TaskRabbit. Then the cycle would start over again. Most days, my circumstances felt inescapable. The last thing I needed was another app to slowly chip away at my sanity as I struggled to cobble together enough cash to cover rent and utilities. I told Matt as much. "Screw those other apps," Matt said. "This is the easiest money I've ever made." I have to admit I was intrigued. Matt never gets excited about anything, so part of me wanted to see what had turned him into a diehard so fast. The other part of me was gullible enough to believe there might actually be such a thing as easy money that didn't involve the lottery or an inheritance. It didn't take much badgering from Matt before I scanned his code and clicked the link. The link took me to a nondescript website with nothing but a download button. Seconds later, the app was on my phone. The app itself was bare bones, like Venmo, but with even fewer frills. Nothing but a few tabs. One for my own QR referral, should I want to pass it along. One for linking my bank account, and one showing my current balance of $0. In the middle of the otherwise mostly blank screen were the words, "You have no new tasks." Before I could accuse Matt of tricking me into downloading malware, he cut me off. "I know what you're thinking, but just wait for a task," he said. I was sketched out too after Rachel referred me. The fact that Rachel was using it eased my concerns. Rachel's this girl Matt hooks up with on occasion. I'd only met her a few times at Matt's, but from what I could tell, she didn't seem like the type of person to get into anything that wasn't legit. Aside from the fact that she went to film school, so she has even more debt than we do with fewer employable skills to show for it. "When you say the easiest money you've ever made," I asked, trailing off. "I've already made $800 since downloading it yesterday, and that's not counting the referral fee you just got me. I hope they paid you well to rope me into your weird pyramid scheme," I joked. "Yeah, they did." Matt held up his own app to show me $1,000 had just been deposited into his account. "Jesus, is that for real?" "The money transfers, if that's what you're asking. If this ends up being a scam, at least I know how much our friendship is worth to you." "Oh, they way overpaid then," he said. He laughed and flagged down the bartender for another round. We moved on to chatting about movie trailers and how there was barely anything coming out that we wanted to see. I'd almost forgotten about the app altogether. When my phone buzzed 20 minutes later with my first task, I read it and reread it, mystified and more than a little creeped out by the words on the screen. Piss on the bathroom floor. You have 5 minutes to complete the task. Dude, you made it seem like I'd be less sketched out when I got my first task. I said, is this a joke? What kind of sick person created this? Matt read my task and snorted. Yeah, that's a weird one. But $100 is $100. I looked at my phone again. Sure enough, the app was offering me $100 for the task. Below that, a timer was counting down. Already at 4:27. There's no way I'm doing that for $100. So wait for one that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Matt said. Or what? Piss on the floor that someone's going to have to clean. You know how many guys are going to end up doing that tonight anyway. At least you get paid for it. It's a dick move. People are dicks all the time. Have you gotten one like this? The first one I got was knocking over a display stand at Publix. And you did it. For $50. Hell yeah, I did. It was no big deal. I apologized and went on with my day. How are you not more creeped out by this whole thing? How does it even know where we are? Or that you've completed the task? The same way every app does, by spying on you, using location sharing to see who you're with. I mean, how does Instagram know to show me ads for tampons every time I hang out with you? You're an asshole. Matt shrugged. Who is even paying for this? Like, it doesn't make sense. All the other gig apps are connecting workers with clients and taking a cut. There's no upside to this for anyone but the people who do the tasks. My money's on Zuck or some other billionaire. Think about it. They're bored of all the luck stuff. They've got more money than anyone could spend in a lifetime. What else are they going to use it for? But to laugh at all the dumb shit people will do if you pay them. Yeah, I'm not really interested in being part of someone's messed up social experiment. I checked my phone again. The timer was down to a little over 2 minutes. I scanned the app for a decline button, but didn't see one. How do I decline the task? I asked. No clue, I haven't declined one. Since there wasn't an option to decline, I decided to test the app. If someone wanted to mess with me, I'd mess with them right back. I went to the bathroom but didn't do anything. Just waited a minute, washed my hands and returned to the bar. I checked my phone just as the timer ran out. A frowny face appeared on screen. Then the app went black. Matt's phone buzzed a few seconds later. He checked it and laughed. What? Did you get a task? What is it? Matt smirked at me before holding out his phone for me to read. I barely had time to register the words, "Slap your friend," before I felt Matt's hand connect with my face. The smack jolted me off balance, and I jumped up to keep from falling over. What the fuck? I could feel everyone staring at us. I couldn't tell if my cheek was burning from the slap or the embarrassment. Matt held up his hands in apology. "I'm sorry, dude, but $200 was too good to pass up." Having seen the exchange, the bartender made his way over with an annoyed look. "I think that's enough for you two," the bartender said. "All good," Matt replied. "We'll just close out." The bartender shook his head and went to the register to ring Matt up. Matt's phone buzzed again as the bartender returned with the check. Matt checked it and winced. Then he took a big swig of beer and spit it like a fountain all over the bartender. The bartender turned red as security stormed over and grabbed Matt by the back of his shirt, dragging him towards the door. Sorry, Matt said. "It was just a joke. Hope it was funny 'cause you're 86D. Sign the tab and tip him good." Matt called back to me as security shoved him outside. I picked up the pen to sign the tab. When my phone buzzed on the bar top, I saw the alert from task and told myself not to check it. But my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it. The task read, "Do not leave a tip. Write fuck you instead." Every alarm bell in my head was going off. This went well beyond location sharing and listening in on conversations. I looked around the bar, sure I'd find someone in here watching us. pulling the strings to see how far we could be pushed. But I didn't see anyone who didn't seem to be here for a normal bar outing. And the way everyone was side-eyeing me like I was an exhibit in a freak show suggested they were not in on whatever was happening. I looked back at my phone, $250 to write "fuck you" instead of leaving a tip. I felt my face flush with shame as I wrote the words, but I had to know if this was for real or not. I was positive I'd walk outside to find Matt had been screwing with me, somehow faking the alerts. I turned the receipt face down and scurried out before anyone could read what I'd written. By the time I stepped outside, the app was alerting me that I was now $250 richer. In the midst of so many emotions, and my desire to get away, at the time it didn't cross my mind that out of all the sketchy aspects of the app, I just encountered the biggest red flag of all. That slap from Matt wasn't a random task. It was a warning. Not following orders had consequences. Matt wanted to go somewhere else and keep celebrating our good luck, as he called it. But once the adrenaline faded, I felt hungover and on edge, so I went home. The whole thing felt wrong on multiple levels, so I decided not to go on the app for a while. Still, I needed some proof that the whole thing wasn't a hoax, so I transferred the money to my bank, and sure enough it showed up. As easy as the money had been, I had a knot in my stomach about it, though I struggled to articulate why. Part of it was being watched, all the unanswered questions about who was behind the app, and why anyone would create it. But I think something about it also felt manipulative, like I was just a puppet in some messed up game I didn't understand. But I can't deny, I had felt an immediate rush along with whatever pang of guilt came from stiffing the bartender. Like the app had tapped into some impulse I hadn't even known was there. Did I want to do that? Had the app made me take the smallest step towards some darkness lurking inside of me? I accepted some rideshare requests, hoping to distract myself, but even those reminded me how I was trapped driving, having leased a car to be able to drive for the apps, and now needing to accept a certain number of rides to make my payments each month. It wasn't even midnight before I found myself shampooing the floor mats in the back seat, after some drunk kid puked on the ride home from a bar. Screw this, I thought. I opened Task and waited. No tasks showed up. I refreshed the app, but still nothing. I figured they just didn't have the bandwidth to monitor the app 24/7s. But looking back again, I think it was conditioning me to want more tasks, like the app was negging me, making me feel unworthy so I'd be grateful when it paid attention to me again. It wasn't until the next day that a new task showed up. I won't bore you with all the details of the tasks I accepted over the next few days to chip away at my debt, except to say that they seemed mostly mundane, if pretty dickish. At first they were basic me's like spitting gum where someone's guaranteed to step in it, bumping into a kid with ice cream, so they drop it, ringing someone's doorbell in the middle of the night, and ditching. I realize now that they were escalating, though I barely noticed at the time. 72 hours after refusing to piss on a bathroom floor, I was doing things like taking a package off a neighbor's porch and tossing it in the dumpster, and calling a random number to leave a message telling someone their sister had died. Robert Cialdini wrote this book, Influence, that I read a while back. In it he talks about the psychological tactic enemy soldiers use to turn patriotic American POWs against their own country. See, no true patriot will immediately talk crap about their homeland, but if you can get them to admit that the US isn't perfect, it's a slippery slope. Something in the mind makes you double down on things you said in the past. So once they'd admitted the US wasn't perfect, they were willing to talk about the flaws in more detail. With a bit of patience, the enemy soldiers would have American POWs publicly denouncing American values altogether. They never even noticed the concessions they were making until it was too late to turn back. Like those soldiers, I didn't fully recognize that I was leaping across lines I never would have crossed before Matt introduced me to the app. The first time I truly had a chance to recognize how far I'd strayed arrived about a week after I accepted the first task. I hadn't gone back to my other gig apps since the vomit incident. I made way too much accepting tasks for what felt like far less effort. But for whatever reason, I still don't like to think of myself as a gig worker. Yes, I take gigs, but knowing I might need something on my resume, I occasionally work part-time for a company doing data entry. It's already mind-numbing work for a little above minimum wage, but returning to it this time was downright painful. Up to this point, I had had to leave the app open in the background for it to assign me tasks, but halfway through the morning, my phone lit up with a notification even though I was pretty sure I had closed the app, and my phone was on focus mode. The funny thing is, I had been wishing for something to break the monotony of the work, and here it was, my desire fulfilled. Email redacted folder name. To redacted email address, you have 90 seconds to complete the task. My pulse quickened as I read the notification. On the one hand, I knew it was wrong, and probably illegal. On the other hand, as far as I had been told, the company did not deal in sensitive information that would interest the public. The bulk of the data I even had access to was mundane user analytics. The company sold to advertisers. I quickly rationalized the task, though I suspected it would likely be the end of my working there. I'd already decided to do it before I even registered that it paid a whopping $2,000. By far the most I'd been offered for any task. Up to that point, it took all of 30 seconds before the money was on its way to my bank account. I got a huge hit of adrenaline, something I'd started to crave lately. My head buzzing, I focused as much as I could until lunch. Upon my return, I wasn't remotely fazed to learn my supervisor wanted to see me in her office. She was shockingly nice about the entire thing. She did not immediately fire me, though she was well within her right to. Instead, she gave me a chance to explain myself. A look of confusion came over her when I declined, and she politely let me go. Like I said, I had been told by her specifically that we did not deal in particularly sensitive information, so the way she handled the whole thing tracked. But when I looked back one final time, I saw something on her face that made me think otherwise. Dread. She looked terrified. The next day I understood why. When I saw on the news that the company was shuttering its doors after a data breach, the pang of guilt I felt over potentially costing a lot of people their jobs was quickly replaced by a fear of the possible repercussions. I wondered if I would be thrown under the bus in the company's attempts to cover their tail. As if it could read my mind, my phone lit up with a notification informing me I'd received a $5,000 employee loyalty bonus. The familiar mix of elation at the huge payday and not inducing chills from being involved in something so strange crept in, and I managed to shake off any remorse I felt. I fell into the now routine act of rationalizing away what I had done. Whereas before, I had told myself no one was really getting hurt by my actions, this time I focused on the fact that clearly the company had been doing something shady, or else a seemingly innocuous folder wouldn't have been enough to bring them down. Fuck them for doing something that put me in this position in the first place. I thought. It wasn't the first time I had gotten angry that week. Getting angry anytime guilt or shame started to creep in over a task had become a pattern for me. Like a lot of you reading this, I did what I was supposed to do. I went to college. I studied something useful, but the jobs in what I studied were mostly in bigger cities, far away from family circumstances that required me to be close to home, and even if I could have moved, the entry-level pay wouldn't have covered the cost of living before I took my loans into account. It didn't matter what I did, or where I went, life was shaping up to be one big hamster wheel. Everywhere around me, I heard folks complaining about how hard it was to find good workers who care about the job, who are loyal. Well, what did they think was going to happen when they filled our heads with dreams of cushy office jobs and home ownership, loaded us up on debt, and then offered us one fucking way to pay it off? By staring at a register or a screen, doing absolute bullshit for $15 an hour. If we're lucky for 10-12 hours a day, we were sold a bill of goods. The American dream is dead and gone, but the older generations are still doling out advice based on their experience of a steady paycheck and a reasonable mortgage. And on the flip side, every time we open a fucking app, some rich influencer is saying that if we follow our passion, we'll find more freedom and success than we ever thought possible. But both sides are speaking from a place of having already found success, and every single one of them is positive. The only thing that factors into that success is good old hard work. So of course most of us end up juggling multiple gigs, trapped in the hustle economy. At least that way we have some semblance of control over our lives. Sure, we have crippling student loans that our best hope of paying off is the government stepping in to forgive. And yeah, buying even an outhouse is a pipe dream. But at least we get to clock in and clock out as we want. Quit when we get bored, give rides or deliver food, YOLO what little we have into crypto, or curate our own social feeds on the off chance fortune might rain down on us and lift us out of the endless grind. I'm not proud of how little I hesitated accepting these tasks. It legitimately felt like, for the first time, I had a way out of the rat race. So what if I had to be a dick to do it? Jeff Bezos wouldn't even let his employees take a proper bathroom break, and look where he ended up. Not long after I thought I had perfected the art of justifying my actions, I got the task that finally changed my mind. The day before I downloaded the app, I had made plans for the following weekend with a woman I'd matched with on Hinge. I'd been anxious about the date when I committed to it, worried we'd be limited to the cheapest margaritas I could afford, along with complimentary chips and salsa. Telling my dates I'd had a late lunch and wasn't hungry enough for dinner had become my go-to move on the dating scene. But that night was different. Because I could finally afford to go somewhere nice, I texted her back to let her know we were still on, and told her where to meet me. We met up at a spot local foodies love, and hit it off immediately. When I say it was the best date I've ever been on, I'm not exaggerating. We bonded over the things we had in common, laughed our asses off ribbing each other about the things we disagreed on, and kept the tapas and fancy cocktails flowing for 2 hours before things went south. When my date announced she needed to use the restroom, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. As she was walking away, I checked the task I'd just been assigned. Tell the woman in red to hurry up and get it over with. I looked around the restaurant and saw a woman in a red coat sitting alone a few tables over. She was lost in thought, running a finger around the rim of her martini glass. I checked my phone again and frowned in confusion. Get what over with? I didn't consider the question for long enough. I had gotten greedy. I happily ignored all the details about the woman that might have stopped me from going over there. It didn't seem like it could possibly be that big a deal, but the payout alone should have been enough of a red flag. If I'd received $7,000 in total to destroy a company, how innocent could a task worth $10,000 have been? I got up and walked over. I was already speaking before the woman even realized I was there. Hurry up and get it over with, I said. I registered shock on her face as my words sunk in, but she didn't say a word. I didn't say anything less, just returned to my seat. What was that about? My date asked, having seen the exchange as she came back from the bathroom. Oh, nothing, I said, staring at my phone expectantly. Don't worry about it. I grinned as my phone alerted me that I was $10,000 richer. What should we order next? But my date wasn't looking at me. She was staring in horror as the woman in red left the restaurant in tears. We didn't have a view of the street outside, but we could clearly hear the screech of tires and the screams of patrons close enough to the window to see the woman in red walk into oncoming traffic. My date didn't look at me again until she was giving the police her statement. By the time the cops had quit asking me questions about what I said to the woman in red and decided I wasn't involved in her death, my date was long gone. That was the last straw. This time I couldn't rationalize away the guilt and shame. This app was evil. There was no more pretending that wasn't the case. Whether there were flesh and blood employees behind it, or some sinister presence, I didn't know, but the evil nature of it was undeniable. I went home and deleted the app. I sent Matt a string of texts asking him what he'd gotten me into. I called him several times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I wished my roommates weren't out of town, as I was desperate to talk to someone, anyone, about what had happened. Instead, I could only smoke and drink myself into an oblivion, as I waited for a reply from Matt, finally falling asleep around 4 a.m. I woke at 9 a.m. to frantic banging on the door. It was Matt, eyes bloodshot with dark crescent moons carved into his lower lids. Before I could lay into him, he had pushed his way inside and started closing the blinds. I fucked up, man, he said. I fucking fucked up. I shouldn't have gotten you involved. No shit, dude. I had to delete the app. You can't delete it. What? It keeps coming back. You have to get rid of your phone. And even then, I'm not sure. I checked my phone, and sure enough, it was front and center. I deleted it again, and watched it disappear. But when I scrolled to my next screen, it had already reappeared. What the fuck is this thing? Matt. He didn't answer. His face catatonic now. That's when I finally noticed he had blood on his shirt. What happened? Where's that blood from? He sat on the floor and hugged his knees as he started rocking in place. I fucked up. I fucking fucked up. They're dead. They're dead. They're dead. He just kept repeating the words over and over like a broken record, making my skin crawl. Who's dead? All of them. Because I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do what? I couldn't do it. I tried, but I couldn't. Whatever it is, we'll go to the police and get it straightened out. We'll tell them about the app. I said, we can't go to them. They'll blame me. For what? Just tell me what happened. You don't get it. He snapped. We can't. They're listening. They know what we're doing. Okay, I said, trying to calm him down. All right. Why don't you take a shower and get cleaned up? Then you can tell me what happened, and we'll figure out what to do. Shortly after I got him in the shower, someone knocked on the door. By the time I looked out the window, a delivery truck was driving away. I cracked the door and saw a small box on the front step. I picked it up and shook it. Whatever was inside thudded around. I locked the door behind me and carried the box to the kitchen. Is someone here? Matt called from the shower. Just Amazon. All good. I cut open the box and stared in confusion. Inside was a revolver. My phone buzzed. An alert from Task. My hand shook as I checked it. Matt's services are no longer needed. Terminate his employment. You have 5 minutes to complete the task. A wave of nausea hit me. I thought about calling 911, but I realized Matt might be right. I had no idea what to tell them. There's an evil app that wants me to murder my friend. Good luck with that. I decided to call Rachel. She was the only other person I knew of who was involved with this thing. Maybe she'd have some information or know what to do. I started to ask Matt if he could recall her number when I remembered he'd texted us both when we all went to a party together a few months back. I searched through my texts and found the chat. Rachel picked up almost immediately. Hello, Rachel. It's Matt's friend Spencer. I kept my voice down and went to my room. Something happened. I don't even know where to start. Where's Matt? He's here, in the shower. I think they want me to not over the phone. I'm close by. I'll be right over. I hung up and noticed the shower had stopped. I walked back out to the living room to find Matt. Still wet but now dressed in the clothes I'd left for him. His back was turned but I could see the empty box next to him on the floor. What's the task? He asked. Matt, I wasn't going to. He turned and aimed the gun at me. I'm serious. I wasn't. I would never. Just put down the gun and let's talk. Shut the fuck up and let me think. With his free hand he clutched his head, his face scrunching up as he held back a sob. He took a deep breath and let it out. I'm sorry, man. He gripped the gun tighter. His finger moved to the trigger. A car door slammed outside and got his attention. He hesitated as he turned to look. I jumped in his direction and tackled him. The gun skidded across the floor. He thrashed at me as I held him down. Stop, I said. I'm not trying to hurt you. The fight went out of him, and he quit struggling and going to stand up now. I told him, are you going to be calm? He nodded. I stood and moved to the window, peering through the blinds to see Rachel walking up the front steps. It's just Rachel, I told him. The three of us are going to figure this out together. Okay. Matt didn't say anything, but he sat up. I unlocked the door and had it halfway open when a sickening realization hit me. Rachel had never been to my place before, and I didn't give her my address. I was already slamming the door when she raised her own gun and fired. Relief washed over me as I realized she'd missed. I dropped to the floor, reached up and dead-bolted the door. I turned around and pressed my back against the wall. But from this angle, I could see that she hadn't missed after all. Matt's lifeless eyes stared at me from the carpet, blood pooling around the hole in his head. Steady, methodical thumping came from the door, the sound of Rachel kicking at it. I scrambled to grab the revolver from where it had skidded across the floor. When I tackled Matt, I aimed it at the door and yelled out, "Please, don't make me shoot you, Rachel. Just leave." "I can't," she called back, her voice cracking. "They have my sister. I gave them." I told her. She couldn't finish the sentence. Bullets peppered the door. Around the lock, she kicked it again, the frame splintering. I pulled the trigger, hoping a warning shot would scare her off. Click, nothing. I pulled the trigger again. Click, nothing. They'd sent me an unloaded gun, a twisted test that I'd apparently failed. I ran to the garage and climbed in my car. I had no idea where Rachel was, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I pushed the garage door button. The door hummed as it rose slowly. Rachel's boots appeared just outside. I didn't hesitate. I turned the ignition and shifted into drive. I slammed on the gas, bursting through the door and catching Rachel off guard. Her upper body slammed into the hood of the car, even as she fired the gun at me through the windshield. Unable to see with bits of garage door blocking my view, I swerved across the lawn and plowed into the mailbox, sandwiching Rachel's body against it. Tears burned my eyes as I climbed out of the car and crawled towards Rachel's body. Neighbors had emerged from their homes. If they'd been disturbed by the gunshots, they'd hidden behind closed doors. Now that the threat seemed neutralized, they exited to witness the gruesome aftermath. I leaned over Rachel's dying body. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I didn't want to." Her mouth flapped uselessly as she tried to speak. I moved closer to hear what she was saying. "My sister. They said they'd let her quit if I please help her." "Who are they?" I asked, but Rachel was gone. I noticed blood dripping onto the lawn near Rachel's arm. I looked down to see I'd caught a bullet in the shoulder. I heard sirens as I passed out next to her body. I awoke in the hospital to find an officer sitting with me. I tried to sit up. "Stay down," she said. "You were hurt pretty bad, but you're going to be okay. Your parents have been notified, and they're on the way." I didn't. It wasn't. I had no idea where to begin. "You don't have to say anything. You're not in any trouble." The neighbors' reports made it pretty clear. It was self-defense. The two deceased turned out to be some pretty big drug dealers, and you got caught in the crossfire. But you're lucky. Things could have been a lot worse for you. "That's not what happened," I said. She looked at me for a while, taking me in. Then she said, "You're not thinking straight. Get some rest and we can chat later if you still want to." The cop stood up and walked out of the room. I noticed a phone on the table, between my bed and the chair she'd been sitting in. "Hey, you left your phone," I called out. She turned back and shook her head as she held up a cell. "Mine's right here. I'm pretty sure that's yours." The phone buzzed on the table, giving me instant chills. A single notification lit up the screen. "You have a new task." I think I've started losing time, and my mind, again. It's really hard to keep track of it when your world's reduced to the same four walls, the same pale ceiling, and the same broken body on the same fucking bed you've been lying in for weeks. Life for me is just living in a prison of day and night, and letting the time get the best of me as I feed on painkillers, liquid food, and remain functional through some momentary exercises to test if I can still walk or balance myself. I don't sleep deep too. It's in little fragmented dreams between the clicks of melatonin tabs. 4 months ago, I had an accident. I fell off my bike after a car crashed into me, and I hit my head on a streetlight. Then came a brain swelling and some nerve damage. I spent the first few weeks in the hospital, and now I'm home, mostly bedridden. I can move with effort, get to the bathroom, to the kitchen if I have to, but I've been told not to push it. My wife's been incredible. Yes, too incredible. She's been stuck here taking care of me like a full-time job. I felt selfish, and I saw it was taking a toll on her mice. The fatigue, haunted eyes, and nights she pretended to sleep, but didn't. Last week, she broke down and said she wanted to spend a few days at her sister's place across town, just to breathe, or better, catch some sleep and rest. I told her to go hell. I insisted now that I mustered up the strength to walk around and get some things done. Maybe that was my guilt talking, but I felt bad for tying her down, for becoming this palsied burden in a bed, who needed help for the most trivial things. I can't blame myself entirely for my condition, but yes, I also cannot force her to be my slave. So she left Thursday evening. She kissed my forehead and told me she still loved me, sat promising to call every morning. She said her brother would also drop by often, and that he had a set of spare keys to the front door, so I wouldn't have to get up to receive him. To be honest, it did make me a bit uncomfortable and anxious, you know, but I knew Ian quite well, so maybe I was just overthinking it. Whatever. That night she left. I couldn't tell when I fell asleep. I was in that in-between state. What do you call it? Yeah, hypnagogic, drifting in and out. At some point, I happened to realize I was thirsty, like really thirsty. My stomach hurt a little too. I hadn't eaten since maybe lunch, so I got up. Walking had become more comfortable, given the little amount of practice I did every day. But getting down the stairs was still an ordeal. I did make it downstairs, but halfway down I heard something. Static, voices, laughter, a television. There's a flat screen in the living room that we barely use. It was on. Some sitcom was playing. I don't know which. The laugh track, it was strange, like quite stuttering and tinny. The people on screen were speaking in a language I didn't know. The colors looked off, and the quality was grainy, like they'd been overexposed. First I figured it was her brother Ian, but it wasn't him, not at all. This man was older, broader, his back was to me, posture relaxed, like he owned the place, weirdly defiant and confident. I should have panicked. I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, watching the back of his head, and for some reason, I felt like I knew him, like not well but well enough to trust that he wasn't a threat. I walked a little closer, and he turned his head slightly toward me without looking away from the TV. "Thought you'd be asleep," he said. His voice was rather calm, almost amused. "Rachel told me you wouldn't wake up till morning." He chuckled. I blinked. "Sorry, who were you?" "Oh cow," he said, turning his face to mine, like he was remembering something important. "Her stepfather. Didn't we meet in 2013, at your wedding?" My stomach tightened. "She asked me to stay while she was gone," he added. "Said you've been acting weird and needed someone to be around." I figured I had nothing better to do. "How have you been holding up, Sonny?" His name lit something in the back of my head. Some old photo maybe. Wedding day. I didn't push it. I just nodded and acted like I remembered. But something inside me wanted him to leave. "Yes, leave. I guess I don't need anything," I mumbled. "Sorry for not recognizing you immediately. I was told Ian would be coming over." "Yeah, Ian." I told him to stay home. He said, "Just take care of her, all right. She's been through enough. And now that you're doing better, make sure she stays safe." There was a smirk on his face, something unreadable behind it. I don't know why, but I asked, "Could you leave the spare key here?" His smile faltered, just for a second, like he was offended. He pulled the key off his ring and flicked it onto the mantelpiece, then turned toward the door. "All right," he said. "Take care." And he left without another word. I locked the door after him, also checking the windows, drank some water. I made my way back up to my bed. As I slept, I told myself it was nice, that someone still cared about Rachel, that she had people watching out for her. Then I slept, fast and deep. I woke up around 11 a.m. the next day, my sunlight already bleeding through the blinds. For a while I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself the night before had actually happened. Had Cal really come over? Had I actually gotten up? The dull ache in my legs said yes, but the way my memory melted around the edges, it felt more like a weird lucid dream. I didn't have long to think. I heard her voice from downstairs, calling my name. It had this brittle edge to it, like she was holding something back. Maybe she came home late last midnight. I called out to let her know I was awake. A few minutes later, she was standing at the door to my room. Yeah, we slept separately. I needed the entire bed. She didn't walk in right away, just stood there, staring at me. "What?" I asked, forcing a smile. She shook her head. Nothing. Just don't look at me like that. Like what? I wasn't even making a face. Not my first time hearing this either. Does she not like how I look? Like, never mind. You remind me of someone, she said, stepping into the room. Her eyes darted to the nightstand where my meds were. Did you take your pills yet? I nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders tense. I asked her how the visit to her sister went. She shrugged. It was okay. Kind of hard to relax last night though. Why? Did she give you trouble all week? She hesitated. No, you did. I blinked. Me? Her voice cracked a little. I woke up in the middle of the night. You were sitting by my bed. There was a long silence. She kept going, like she'd rehearsed this. You were just sitting there, eyes wide open, staring at me. Didn't say anything, just watching. I called your name, and you didn't even flinch. My mouth went dry. I didn't taste. I wasn't even at your sister's place. She dismissed. Not at her place. Early this morning, by my bed. As I slept, I came home at 3 a.m. last night. That's not the first time, either, she said. I've been hearing things at night, stuff falling, doors creaking. I thought maybe the meds were messing with your sleep, or something, but seeing you just there, beside me, not blinking. What were you doing? She stopped, wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. I felt sick. I wanted to say I had no memory of that I couldn't have. Not in the shape I was in, but her voice was real. Her fear was real, and part of me was afraid that maybe I had gotten up. Maybe it was me. I thought about telling her about the night before, about Cal, but something stopped me. She already looked like she was barely holding it together. Instead, I just said I was sorry, that I didn't know what was going on, but I talked to someone, that maybe I needed to up my dosage, or see my neurologist again. She nodded and stood up, muttering something about making coffee. I wanted to call out to her to stop her, to ask why. She said, I reminded her of someone earlier, but the words got caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I lay there for hours after she left the room, trying to remember if I'd ever seen Cal's face before, trying to remember what he looked like. But every time I got close, something changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Now I started to hear and feel things. Maybe it was what Rachel said. Maybe it was the image of myself, just sitting there motionless, watching her breathe. That idea crawled under my skin, and just stayed there like a creepy image you couldn't get your eyes off. I kept trying to tell myself that if I had walked to her room, I would have remembered, I would have felt it. But what if I didn't? I was hypnagogic again. I heard something more distinct. Soft, muffled footsteps over the floorboards. Not loud but careful. I stayed in bed at first, tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe the pipes, maybe Rachel forgot to turn something off. But the sound didn't stop, and I got this terrible, absolute feeling that something was happening. I wasn't supposed to miss, so I got up, raising myself from the pain. Each step was painful, slow, dragging, and terrible. I didn't want to wake her. Didn't want her to see me like this, but I needed to check. I needed to make sure I wasn't turning into something that moved. When I didn't know, the hallway was dark. Her door was half open. I saw the moonlight on the sheets. I didn't breathe. There was someone in the room. Me. It was me, standing at the edge of the bed, just looking down at her. My hands were hanging limp by my sides, but there was something tight about the shoulders, like they were coiling. My wife was asleep, her breathing soft and oblivious. I couldn't move for a second, couldn't even think. I just stared, trying to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't moving, just watching her, head slightly tilted, the way I imagine I looked when she saw me beside her bed. And then, it leaned forward, both hands rising, reaching for her throat, beginning to apply pressure. I could see it smirk from the distance, and begin to grunt. I didn't think, I just ran, or tried to my straddling at the fastest pace I could. I broke into a guttural cry, panicking. I launched at him, at me. I grabbed his arms, his shoulder, and he was warm and solid. I still remember that. He turned around and I saw nothing, no one. And then I looked down, and my hands were on her. My fingers were curled around the collar of her shirt, close to her neck. She was gasping, eyes wide and crying. I stumbled back like I'd been struck, confused. Where did the apparition go? No, I said. No. I wasn't try. As she curled into herself, sobbing. I reached for her, hands crawling to her on her bed, and she visibly flinched. I don't know what's happening, I said. I don't know. I swear to God, Rachel. I thought. She was shaking her head. No. You need help, she screamed. This is serious. I'm going to call someone. No. This isn't safe. I started crying too. I wasn't even trying to hold it in anymore. I couldn't. I was broken. I'd broken her. I don't mean to. I kept saying, I don't want to hurt you. I'd never, you know that. I'd never. She didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, still hugging herself. Stop looking at me like that. Stop. She suddenly burst out. Why are you smiling? Do you enjoy this? She gasped in disbelief. I froze. Smiling. I wasn't smiling. Not at all. I didn't think I was. My face felt numb. I wiped at my mouth with the back of my hand. Nothing. No smirk. Rachel, what's wrong? I bawled, my voice cracking, body shaking. I crawled back. She just kept crying, curled up like a child. And then, I don't know why I asked it. Maybe because I needed it to make sense. Maybe because some part of me still wanted to believe it wasn't me. Did you tell your stepfather about what's been happening? I mumbled. About me sleepwalking, or my health, or me looking off, or whatever. Because, he said something the other night. She looked up, confused, her face pale, choking on her tears. What, Cal? I said. Your stepdad. He came over that night you left. He said you asked him to come and stay. I added, said, you were worried about me, that I'd been acting weird. He told me to take care of you. She didn't move. Rachel, I asked again, voice trembling. She blinked, and then, slowly, she said, Cal's dead. The room collapsed inward. My mouth went dry. He strangled my mom, while she was asleep. She said, her voice cracking, 3 years ago. Then, he killed himself. Don't you remember that? I didn't respond, because no, I didn't, or maybe I did. But if I did, who was it that came over that night? Because if I remember it now, it means he remembers me too. I found him after a storm. As a kid, I loved searching our pool for creatures. The sea had swept in. Grammy's house was built on the very edge of the shore. A giant ancient beach house where I spent every summer. But in Florida, storm season never really ends. I grew used to waking up every morning and running outside barefoot where the sea was still lapping at my ankles. I spent all day sifting through our debris-littered pool with my dollar store fishnet, searching for sea creatures. There was one time when I thought I found something. I was kneeling on the edge, peering into the glassy surface speckled with dirt and leaves. Movement under the stillness sent me stumbling back, dropping my net. Upon closer inspection though, it was just an old plank of wood. I was awkwardly poking at it when the surface exploded, drenching me. For a split second, I felt a rush of excitement. Fish, until the fishes started laughing. Roman, the boy from across the street, the one who could hold his breath far longer than normal humans, was infamous for lurking in Grammy's pool. He claimed he was doing research, but I never knew what for. Roman was a weird kid. He reminded me of a fish. His eyes were too big, too far apart, and I swore his nose grew an inch every day. Sopping wet, he hauled himself out of the pool and slumped down beside me, dark blonde hair plastered over his eyes. Roman prodded me. He was always prodding me to get my attention, and it drove me insane. Whatcha looking for? Fish, I answered. He laughed, kicking his feet in the water. Me too. Do you want me to help you find some? I told him to go away back to his own house, but Roman was allergic to the word no. He turned to me, blowing soaking strands of curls out of his eyes. Okay, so can I watch you? Roman nudged me, and I almost lost my balance. I know what you're looking for. You know, I'm not stupid. I had a feeling he had been eavesdropping over our broken fence before I could call my parents. He slipped back into the water. Roman wasn't a boy to trust. I accidentally told him I peed in the sea once, and by the next day, the entire class was calling me names. So I would have much preferred to search for marine life without him lurking around. I found all kinds of things in our pool. Starfish, the occasional jellyfish spilled over in the tide, and even a baby shark my mom had to rescue with a fishing net. But I never found what I was looking for, what my Grammy had searched for, and ultimately given up on, and what Roman was catching onto. Fish people, stay with me. Okay, so you should know my Grammy wasn't fully there, after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of Alzheimer's. But she was also a very intelligent woman. For the most part, she was bedridden by the time I started elementary school. But the stories she used to tell me when she was awake kept me visiting, even when I knew deep down that I didn't want to watch her deteriorate. Her stories of encounters with fish people were worth it, worth the pain of staying by her side. I remember my 10th birthday. The power went out right in the middle of my favorite episode of Hannah Montana. Grammy was sleeping on the couch, tucked under blankets, and I was inhaling my ice cream birthday cake. When the storm blew out the TV, I abandoned my snack, remembering Mom's instructions in case a hurricane hit. I grabbed my flashlight, 2 bottles of water, snacks and her meds, and helped Grammy down into the basement to wait it out. I was used to her staying silent, just sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees, her expression content. She was starting to forget my name. Some days I was Charlotte, then I was Charlie, and then I was a stranger. This wasn't one of those times. Grammy smiled at me, patted the space next to her, and said, "Can I tell you about the fish people, Charlotte?" Grammy didn't usually talk to me. It wasn't that she didn't want to. It was more that she couldn't. Mom explained it the best way she could, in a to-the-point, mom way, blunt and realistic. I would have to come to terms with Grammy forgetting me. I didn't understand Alzheimer's, but I did understand the concept of forgetting. I started to notice it during visits. At first it was subtle. Grammy would forget to eat her dinner, or go to the bathroom, but then she started asking if I was a friend of her granddaughter. And painfully, so fucking painfully, she started asking who I was. I saw my Grammy deteriorate, and I was helpless. Mom and Dad tried to put her into a home, but she insisted on staying by the sea. That's all she said. "I want to stay by the sea," she whispered, barely a breath, stuck in her favorite chair, her eyes growing more vacant, more frenzied and scared. What I didn't understand as a child was that this disease was cruel. It wasn't going to leave anything behind. It made her scream and cry, and in the later stages, try and throw her hands at my mother, who she no longer recognized. "I want to die in the water. I want to die in the water. Let me die in the water." I think her words broke my parents' hearts. I knew I shouldn't have, but I kept visiting, even when it hurt, even when the inevitable arrived. When she spoke less and less until she was barely speaking at all. I had gotten used to her calling me different names, random ones that came to mind. I got used to her snapping at me, then apologizing, then asking where her granddaughter was. I got used to imagining our conversations instead. The two of us would sit for hours, me lost in fantasy, while she stared blankly at me. I would try not to cry, pretending to manifest conversations that weren't one-sided. She would ask about school, and I would say, "Oh yeah, it's fun." I would imagine her laugh, her voice saying, "I hope you're making lots of friends." "Yeah, Grammy, I am." I guess I got used to this blank side of her, like a ghost wearing my Grammy's face. When she spoke, I don't think I fully registered it. I watched the ceiling seem to sway, as the emergency lights flickered on and off, shadows casting through the shutters reflecting across her face. The dull sound of howling wind, and the rattling of the house's old foundations sent me into a panic. Grammy's house wasn't built for hurricanes, and I was terrified. The house groaned like a deep-sea monster, and I felt helpless in the pit of its stomach. But this was the first time she had looked me directly in the eye, and called me Charlotte. I was scared that this was the last conversation I would be having with her. "Fish people," I repeated, resisting the urge to bury my head in my knees. Across the room, wine bottles rattled on old wooden shelves. When one rolled onto the concrete floor and shattered on impact, something ice-cold slithered down my spine. Grammy nodded with a dreamlike smile. "I met him when I was your age," she said, reminiscing. "A beautiful boy from the sea, and I was going to marry him." She laughed, and it was a good laugh. It was Grammy's laugh. He asked me to be his queen, and we were going to run away together to his home under the ocean. Her voice grew somber, her unfocused eyes finding me. The lights flickered off, but I wasn't scared. Even when my Grammy became a faceless shadow, I was captivated by her story. When a magical boy promises to take you to a whole other world and promises marriage, what else is there to say except yes? I found myself smiling, comforted by her words, her effortless way of storytelling. I jumped up to grab my flashlight, holding it underneath my chin. Grammy continued. "His name was Sebastian," she murmured. "Such a beautiful man. His hair reminded me of seaweed, tangled and curling perfectly over eyes the color of stardust." I was fully invested in the story. "Did he have a tail?" She grinned, and her expression was so warm, so her. I felt my eyes sting. "He did," she whispered. "Giddy." Grammy curled her lip. "I wanted to tell my friends, but he was very clear." She mimicked his voice, holding up her finger. "Clementine, you must promise me you will never reveal my secret to anyone." She found my gaze, her smile softening. I kept that promise. We made arrangements to run away together. He told me to meet him in the shallows at dawn underneath the sunrise. And I waited. Her tone that had been so chipper, so happy, like she was reliving the memory, grew darker. I waited for him, sitting on the sand, my toes in the shallows, until sunrise turned to sunset. Her expression crumpled like she was going to cry. I waited. I never stopped waiting. Every day, I would step into the shallows and wait for him to come back, even when I was unrecognizable to him, when I had aged way beyond what he knew. Grammy's smile was soft. "I want to die under the sea," she whispered, grasping for my hands. "So I can find him. Because I belong to the ocean, Charlotte." Her fingernails bit into my skin, wrinkled eyes already losing clarity, her grip tightening. "Can you help me find him?" As a 10-year-old, I was convinced I could find Sebastian for her. I stood in the shallows every morning for hours, shivering, calling out for him. I stupidly thought that if I told the sea my Grammy was sick, he would hear and come back. When I was starting middle school, Roman came over to ask my dad for spare fishing gear. Grammy's face lit up, her eyes widening. Sitting in her chair, she nearly toppled off. After not speaking for days or weeks, she was laughing. She thought he was Sebastian, pointing at him with frenzied eyes and laughing, saying, "You haven't changed. Sebastian, you're here." Roman left pretty quickly, shooting me a look before leaving. It became increasingly obvious I wasn't going to find Sebastian. I had this fantasy of taking my Grammy in her wheelchair all the way to the shore. The two of them would talk, and maybe he really could take her back to his world. But that was fiction. The reality was that I was losing my grandma to a disease with zero mercy, and instead of coming to terms with it, I hid in fantasy. Eventually, Mom told me as gently as possible that Grammy had deteriorated. As her disease progressed and reached the later stages, she insisted she could breathe underwater. That's what killed her. One day, Grammy waded into the ocean during a trip to the beach and never resurfaced. Mom and Dad were upset, but I was relieved. Grammy never wanted to die on land, so she had gotten what she wanted. Maybe I was still holding on to the possibility that Sebastian kept his promise. She left me the house, as well as letters to Sebastian she never threw into the ocean. So during college, I spent every weekend there, dropping a letter a day into the surf. However, the house wasn't just mine. I was in class when I got a text from my favorite person. "I'm not cleaning the pool." In her will, to my confusion, my grandma had named Roman. Yes, the weird fish-looking kid as a co-owner of the house once we both turned 18. I thought it was a mistake, and so did my parents. But no, my grandma was very clear, naming him specifically, because he just happened to resemble Sebastian. Dad was pissed. and he had every right to be. Roman wasn't even an acquaintance. I finally built up the courage to tell him I was looking for my Grammy's long-lost merman boyfriend. And of course he went and blabbed to the whole school. Thanks to him, kids were calling me Flounder right up to 8th grade. Roman, surprisingly, had a growth spurt, lost a ton of baby fat, and no longer looked like a fish. So lucky him, I guess. This guy teased me all the way to graduation about my Grammy's merman boyfriend. It's not like I didn't notice him at 16, standing alone in the shallows in the early hours of the morning, his gaze fixed on the surf as if searching for something. I caught him once, ankle deep, arms folded under a sunrise, a pack of fish sticks in his pocket, and at his feet, a lone fish stick dancing in the tide. He didn't say it directly, but I was pretty sure Roman was looking for Sebastian too. But then we both grew up. Roman's text was the icing on the cake of an already shitty day. It was his turn to clean the pool, as per our contract we made when we were 18, and relatively civil, and on talking terms. Ever since starting college, he had become insufferable, apparently. Gaining a personality and love for literature and creative writing turns you into a sociopath. Roman missed my Grammy's anniversary 2 years in a row, lied to my parents about being sick both times, and used her house to throw parties. I cleaned the pool a month earlier, but apparently, this guy had the memory of a goldfish. I texted back, "It's your turn." I wasn't expecting him to reply so fast. "I'm going to a party," was all he texted back, followed by a slew of crying emojis. "It's literally a pool. It's not hard, llama." He followed up with, "She's your grandma, Charlotte." Roman was right. She was my Grammy, so I had to take responsibility. On the night I arrived back at the house, a storm hit. It wasn't a bad one, but I did hide in the newly renovated basement, just in case. I missed the old, ancient vibe. Yes, the rattling shelves filled with bottles were a death trap waiting to happen, but I enjoyed picking up all of Grammy's ceramic fish ornaments and the shells lining each wall. She told me the shells were gifts from Sebastian. Grammy left them to my mother, who gave them to a thrift store. Now the basement was more of a wine cellar, acting as a storage room. I was falling asleep on an old pile of boxes, but then I remembered I left the gate open when my phone vibrated with a text that just said, "Shut the gate, idiot." I grabbed my flashlight and coat. When I got outside, the wind was already picking up, kicking through storm debris. I skirted the pool's edge toward the gate. I stopped, almost skidding on a fallen deck chair, when I caught movement in the pool, twinkling light spider webbing under the rippling surface. The pool lights weren't on. I dropped to my knees at the edge, scanning the water. Immediately, I was a little kid again, scrambling for my old dollar store fishing net. I leaned closer, illuminating stray driftwood and an inflatable beach ball. Here, fishy, fishy. The pretty iridescent glow under the water was not my flashlight. I clicked it off, balancing myself on the edge, following the greenish light prickling under the surface. I had a sudden spontaneous idea to slip off my shoes and wade into the water. When I retracted back on my heels, I caught movement again, a shadow lurking just underneath the blue. Before it broke through, 2 eyes staring directly at me. "Roman." I blinked, and then I shuffled back on my hands and knees, knocking my flashlight into the water. It wasn't Roman. It was a guy, my age, early 20s. I detected annoyance in his expression, amusement flickering on his lips, thick brown curls stuck to his forehead, tangled with seaweed, a crown of driftwood and sea glass. Slowly my gaze dropped into the pool, finding his torso, which ended just below his waist. The boy came closer, head inclining. When the water moved, lapping around him, I glimpsed his legs fused together behind him, slimy scales bleeding into something more akin to a tail. When he grasped the pool walls, his eyes finding mine, I realized he was in pain. I saw the thick trail of red, diluting the surface, blood splatters painting the pool walls. He was hurt. I held my finger up to signal him to wait, and waded into the pool to grab my flashlight. I was already off balance, waist deep in the shallow end, when a violent gust of wind sent me toppling in head first. I felt his hands coming around me, and dragging me to the surface. I plucked my flashlight and clicked it on, illuminating the pool, a trail of blood smearing blue tiles. When I tried to help him, he was surprisingly less timid than I had expected. He showed me his tail, tangled in my dad's old fishing net. His body was slimy to the touch, a full fishtail. He was human, with skin all the way up to his torso, where a greenish slime took over, bleeding into scales that sculpted the rest of him. When I checked his injury, a large gash was taken out of his left fin. His blood looked just like mine. I told him to roll onto his side, and he looked confused. Before doing so, I ran my fingers over bluish carvings just below his ribs, my hands trembling. Gills. This guy was the real deal, which meant my grandma was telling the truth. When I was finished checking him over, I had an idea. Grammy had an old-fashioned bathtub in the downstairs bathroom. If I could get him out of the storm, and inside, I could treat him. I asked him if I could pull him out. The boy looked surprised, but nodded. He didn't speak, only stabbing at his throat with his index finger, before holding out his hand, entangling his fingers with mine. His eyes were frightened, but determined. I dragged him out of the pool, before grabbing a bucket, filling it up, and soaking him. I was conscious of Grammy's words when speaking about Sebastian in his fish form. Children of the sea must be soaked through at all times. If not, they will suffocate. I had asked her how long Sebastian could maintain human legs, and her eyes darkened. Legs are a last resort. The boy was already breathless, his eyes flickering, unfocused gaze on the sky. I soaked him, grabbed his hands, and promised him I was going to save him. The last thing I wanted was for this merman to suffocate on land. So I grabbed his arms, made sure to soak him every few minutes, and dragged him inside the house and into the downstairs bathroom. It took all of my upper body strength and almost sent me falling on my ass, but I managed to haul him into the tub and fill it up. His injuries weren't too bad now. I had the luxury of light. I knelt on the edge of the tub, watching damaged scales healing, reforming themselves over skin. The way they moved, his skin turning blue, then green, hardening into scales, reminded me of a virus, a slow spreading sheen of slime creeping over his flesh. His tail was the most surprising. I expected it to be a fully formed fin, but when I looked closer, I swore I could see traces of bones jutting underneath, almost resembling legs. I tended to him all night, checking and rechecking the temperature of the tub. When I noticed him shivering, I added some warm water, and he seemed content, leaning over the edge, his chin resting on his arms. "So you're Sebastian?" I asked him when I'd bandaged up his fin. The boy shook his head, raising a brow, like he was offended. I asked him his name, but he didn't respond, more interested in my shampoo bottles. He poked one, and it dropped into the bath. The boy shot me a frightened look, and I picked one up. "It's shampoo," I said, prodding my ponytail. "It's for your hair." He nodded slowly, but I noticed him inching away from them. I talked to him for a while, enjoying his presence. I kept him company, telling him about my Grammy stories. And Sebastian, he was a little too big for the tub, his tail flopping over the side, but he seemed comfortable, resting his arms on the side, squinting his eyes, and nodding at the wrong times. I thought it was adorable, the way he at least pretended to understand me. When he zoned out, dipping his head under the water, and blowing bubbles, I figured he was hinting at me to shut up. Halfway through an anecdote though, I started to get breathless. I thought I was just tired. I had been up all night, and I could see the first glimmers of sunrise outside the window. But suddenly, my chest felt tight. All the breath sucked from my lungs. I thought I was getting sick, maybe the flu, before my legs gave way, and I dropped onto the floor, like being severed from strings. I remember trying to move, trying to breathe, but I couldn't. My mouth opening, lips parting, gasping. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe. It's like there was no oxygen in the room. My lungs were starving. Breathing was suddenly so fucking hard. I sucked in as much air as I could, but my body rejected it, contorting as I rolled onto my stomach. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Blood running thick down my chin. I could feel something alive, something wriggling, writhing down my throat. When my lungs contracted, my mouth filled with the taste of salt, I flopped onto my back, my vision blurring in and out, blood-tinged water spluttering from my lips and pooling around me. A slow spreading puddle gave me life when I rolled into it, forcing my numb body back to flickering consciousness. Fucking finally. His voice was like ocean waves echoing in my skull. I rolled onto my side, and I remember feeling like the water was air. The water was giving me oxygen. There was a loud splash, and then wet slapping footsteps moving towards me. Through spotty vision, I saw his tail splitting apart into slimy masses, undulating scales writhing over bones bleeding into legs. A horrific deformed mimic of a human body. I felt ice-cold slimy hands leeching around my ankles. I thought you were never going to stop talking. He laughed. Your grandmother said you were a talker. But wow. I caught his sparkling grin. She was right though. Dad says I can't be king without a queen. The merman's nails bit into me. His words felt like needles being stuck into me. And your grandmother said you would be the perfect bride, Charlotte. I watched his feet stumble, tripping over himself as he dragged me toward the door. He had human feet. The only thing not human was the green fleshy substance growing on his soles. I felt his arms around me, lifting me into the air and dropping me into the pool. I plunged down expecting my lungs to relax now that I was in water, my skin and throat and lungs craving it. Instead though, my body had a very human reaction, immediately clawing for air. I broke the surface, choking up clumps of blood, and found myself face to face with the merman sitting on the side of the pool. The boy's lip curled as he watched my legs struggle to stay afloat. 15 minutes, Charlotte, he murmured, casually crossing one scaled leg over the other. He surveyed me with a mix of confusion and amusement, cocking his head. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs. He leaned forward, kicking his feet in the water. So I'm not sure I understand what's going on right now. I found my voice choked at the back of my throat. You can talk. I managed to hiss out. He shrugged, rolling his eyes. Well yeah, I have a mouth, so yes, I can talk. I asked him if he knew my grandma, and his expression brightened. I do. His smile was smug. She told me you would make a wonderful bride. The merman's words stung. Grammy would never say that. So she found him. I pushed. Did my grandmother find Sebastian? Before he could answer, however, a shadow loomed behind him. The shadow mouthed, "What the fuck?" Roman, wide-eyed and clutching a bottle of vodka. He stood in shorts and a tee, a pair of Ray-Bans pinning back thick sandy hair. He looked like he'd just stumbled out of a spring break party. But he wasn't drunk, or maybe he was, but sober enough to recognize that I was in trouble. I think he meant to attack the merman, but the boy was too fast, spinning around and clawing at his face. Luckily, Roman had the upper hand, with the merman already balancing on the edge, not yet used to human feet. Thank God he had common sense, shoving the fish boy into the pool. The boy hit the water with a loud splash, and Roman staggered back. When the merman dove under, his tail slapping the sides of the pool, my friend dropped to his knees on the edge, holding out his hand for me to grab. I grasped for his wrist, my body already protesting leaving water. "Tell me I'm still tripping," Roman whispered. When he pulled me toward him, I could only shake my head, choking on stinging air that was lashing my lungs. "Well, what the fuck is going on? What is that?" he hissed, hauling me out of the pool. I collapsed face down, gasping for breath, rolling onto my back. For a moment I was disoriented. My body caught between the water and the air, unsure which it needed more. My lungs contracted, already craving the depths. But once I had spluttered up half a gallon of blood-stained water, my body flopped back down. Finally, I could breathe again. Instead of speaking, I shuffled back on my hands and knees, and gestured for Roman to grab a bucket. I pointed to the pool, and then to myself, my voice still stuck in my throat, tangled on my tongue. Roman filled the bucket, and then dumped the contents over my head. I found my breath, thankfully, and then my voice. "Do I have gills?" I whispered, running my fingers down my torso. "Do you have what?" "Gills," I said through my teeth. "Check my back." I shivered when he dragged his nails down my back. No. You don't have gills, dude. I checked myself over, almost obsessively searching for that greenish slime creeping over my skin. But I was clear. It's a fish person. I answered Roman's earlier question. His eyes widened, the bucket slipping from his fingers. Sebastian, I noticed the merman had drawn blood across his cheek. 3 deep gashes. I'm fine, he said. When I started forward, Roman prodded the scratch. Gingerly, his gaze on the pool. Where did he go? I followed his eyes, catching movement underneath. He was hiding. Roman studied the water, his tongue in his cheek. So your grandma's homicidal merman friend Sebastian came to. What? Murder you? I didn't respond, slowly getting to my knees and dragging my fingers across the surface. You know my grandmother. I spoke to the water, ignoring Roman's warnings to stay away from the edge. But my grandma died when I was in middle school. She walked into the sea and never came back. The water rippled, but the merman didn't break through. There's no way you know my grandma. I gritted out. So what the fuck are you? It hit me then. That Grammy really did drown. This thing was fucking with my head. The merman only shot me a knowing smile. Roman disappeared for a moment, reappearing with a bottle of water. He downed the whole thing, scrunching it up and throwing it in the pool. Hey asshole, he said. Answer her questions. I spent the next few minutes questioning an empty pool. The merman had taken a vow of silence. I didn't notice at first. I was too busy waiting for the merman to make his next move. But Roman, sitting cross-legged next to me, had gone through 3 bottles of water in under 5 minutes. It was only when I noticed the slight tinge of green crawling over his left cheek when I realized something was very wrong. Roman was halfway through his 4th bottle of water when I whacked it out his hand. He looked at me in confusion, slowly tilting his head before dropping onto his stomach and slurping up the spilled water, letting out heavy pants, like he couldn't breathe. Roman, I tried to pull him to his feet, but he didn't respond, rolling around in the stemming puddle. I jumped up, grabbed his ankles, and dragged him away from the pool. Fuck, Roman finally spluttered, coughing something up. I can't breathe. His short panting gasps turned into heaves for breath, rolling him onto his side in the recovery position. I waited for him to start puking up water, but he didn't. His cheeks were sickly pale, almost gaunt, like something was sucking the life out of him. When I grabbed Roman's leg, I saw it like a virus, rippling over his bare flesh. In a panic, I plucked off a slimy scale, but another grew in its place. Then another, his skin hardening into a marble-like substance, bleeding into fish-like scales. He's going to suffocate. You know. A voice startled me. The merman was leaning over the edge of the pool, chin resting on his fist. Right now, his body is changing, and if you don't let it, his lungs will reject the change, shrivel up, and the host will die. I was paralyzed before it hit me. When Roman's eyes flickered, his body jerked, his legs fusing together, bones undulating. I realized I had no choice but to push him into the water. I think I apologized, or tried to. My heart in my throat. I tried to roll him into the pool, but the mermaid hissed. No, he needs the sea, the boy said sternly. If you want him to breathe long enough to get him into the sea, you need to slice into his lower back and his neck. Roman was conscious enough to protest, squeezing out a No, are you fucking serious? Don't touch me. His voice dropped into a snarl, eyes rolling back, but I had no choice. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen. With trembling hands, I sliced straight through Roman's throat, and to my relief, he let out a strangled gasp for breath. His eyes flew open. He was breathing, digging deeper. Blood splattered my face, ice cold and wrong, but something else hit me, and my body immediately entered fight or flight. I screamed, dropping the knife and shuffling back, grasping my face to make sure they weren't on me. It took me a moment to realize what I was staring at. Wriggling between flaps of flesh were tiny, worm-like things, filling him, gushing out of the cut. When they made contact with air, they started to shrivel up and dry, going still. Dancing tendrils crumbled apart, spider webbing down Roman's neck. I wasn't talking to a merman. Sebastian was never a merman, a magical being who lived under the ocean. My Grammy and I had been talking to parasites that had taken over human bodies. They forced the body to adapt to water, to crave water, and then drown them. The merman didn't want a queen to marry. I felt sick, my stomach contorting. "You only drown men," I said, the words tumbling from my mouth. When the merman inclined its head, I knew exactly what it was thinking. "You can't tell the difference between us," I said. "So you wait to see if we will change. You've got to be fucking kidding me." Roman was coughing, spluttering, his eyes wide. But even conscious, he was crawling toward the pool, toward water, dragging himself, like the thing inside him was in full control. I grabbed him before he could, scooping him into my arms. He was so light, his legs already half transformed, glued together into a tail. "He needs to drown in the sea," the merman said. "He needs water, or he'll die." The boy's smile was filled with thread-like worms. "The body doesn't have long," as if emphasizing his words. Roman's body was jerking in my arms, trying to get back to water. His eyes weren't his, quivering lips screaming at me to throw him in. With zero choice, I pulled the merman out of the pool with one hand. With Roman dying in my arms, I carried him all the way to the shallows and let him slip into the water. The merman instructed me to fully slash open his throat so his body could adapt. When I couldn't, the merman did it for me, slashing open his throat, carving gills into marble-like flesh. Roman flopped into blood-stained water, gasping, sobbing, rolling onto his front. He begged me not to let him go, but already, his voice was different, dropping down in octaves, his eyes unblinking, staring at me. I told Roman it was okay, and that he was just going to sleep. By the time he lay on his stomach, a tail pushing out through his mangled legs, he blinked at me like I was a stranger. The merciful thing would have been to kill him, to stop the parasites writhing beneath his skin, already coiling around his iris. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, watching my friend suffocate on land. I watched the merman drag him out into the ocean, the two of them disappearing under the surf. I wanted to believe that the parasite didn't take all of them. The merman seemed to retain human speech. Maybe Roman would be the same. I went home and took 3 showers, scrubbing my body until I was screaming. I cleaned up the blood in the pool, splattered on the tiles, and then I fucking cried. Roman's disappearance was ruled a drowning. A year later, it's spring break, and my parents have been trying to convince me to rent out the house to college kids. I've been refusing. I don't want anyone near the pool. I clean it every weekend, but I can't bring myself to actually use it. I've been researching what exactly I encountered. The closest I've come to is the horsehair worm, a parasitic thing that manipulates the host's behavior to drown themselves. But this thing only infects insects. It's harmless to humans. So what infected Roman and the merman? Is this an evolved version? The symptoms are exactly the same. Horsehair parasites. All parasites lay eggs to reproduce. So why was this one so obsessed with finding a female? 3 days ago, my parents managed to convince me to rent it out for the summer. I came down to check it in the morning, half asleep. Mom and Dad are visiting to see if it needs any renovations. I was planning to let a group of middle schoolers splash around in it for a girl's birthday. Stepping out into the yard, the first thing I noticed was the cement patio was soaking, and there he was, casually leaning against the pool edge, chin resting on his arms. His tail lapped the water, fully formed, a greenish blue. I don't know why my Grammy described the tails as magical and breathtaking. She didn't see the reality of Sebastian. There was nothing magical about the parasite clinging to my friend's body. A cruel mimic of what this thing thought a tail was. Human bones contorted and forcibly molded and shaped to adapt. There was nothing beautiful about his unblinking, colorless eyes staring at me. Nothing enchanting about the crown of sea glass forced onto his head, beads of velvety red staining his temples, or the strands of seaweed tangled in his hair. I saw him for what he really was, a drowned husk of flesh infested with a parasite. There was no recognition in his expression, and yet he was still here, in the pool he had been playing in as a child. I wanted to believe it was his memories bringing him back to a familiar place, but then I saw the wriggling, thread-like things lapping around him. With a grin, Roman slipped under the surface, his tail splashing water in my face. I called my parents with shaking hands, canceling the visit. I messaged the kids not to bother. But already, the gate was flying open, excited footsteps slapping across the patio. The first kid cannonballed, followed by another, and another. They kept coming, like they were drawn to my pool. Townspeople, throwing themselves into the depths. Except they didn't resurface. I ran back inside, and locked myself in my room. I'm terrified this thing is spreading. It's been an hour since I locked myself in here. It's so quiet, I'm too scared to look outside. I can't stop thinking about the merman's words. 15 minutes. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs.